Why Japan needs a supercar. So I already made a short on this topic, but I respectfully disagree with some of the takes that y'all left. Now that the Nissan GTR is officially discontinued, Japan no longer has any active production supercars, and I really think that Japan needs another supercar. We're talking one that's been fully designed, engineered, and built within their country. So to the guy who commented on my short saying, Japan still makes a supercar, it's the new NSX, dummy. Dog, I hate to break it to you, but the new NSX, the car's assembled in Marysville, Ohio. And not Ohio, this Ohio. Being made in Ohio is like having plastic and cheese. It's about as American as you can get. And regarding comments saying that supercars are pointless because blah 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 speed limits, I feel like these people have missed the point. It doesn't matter if you personally don't see a point in driving fast. It doesn't matter if a country's roads are too small. I think people underestimate what a supercar actually represents. It affects a company's brand recognition and even a country's automotive prowess. It's not just about speeding or going speed limits or driving fast. Let me explain. The first thing that supercars do is that they push technological boundaries. The better the supercar, the better the rest of the cars from the company. Much like how trickle-down economics is a thing, trickle-down technology is also a thing. Oftentimes, because of how expensive they are to develop, their powertrain will find their way into other models from the company, like the Dodge Viper and the Ram, the Ford GT and the Ford Raptor. Engines can even be shared between sister companies like the Ferrari F430 and the Maserati MC Stradale, or the Lamborghini Huracan and the Audi R8. Even from Japan's golden age from the 90s to 2000s, even 2010s, we can also see this happening with the original Honda NSX, and even the Honda freaking Accord V6 would use its engine later down the line, and that is the coolest thing ever. Even aside from sharing technology within cars that are in the same company or between sister companies like with Lamborghini and Audi or Maserati and Ferrari, the most influential way that supercars advance the entire lineup of car kind is actually just through the desire of competition. Do you think Porsche and BMW just woke up randomly and decided to make the PDK and DCT? No, they were doing it because they were competing against one another and trying to make insanely fast shifting transmissions, which in turn leaped all of transmission technology forward. It's not just the literal company's own supercar giving its technology to other cars within the company, it's this desire to keep up with the best of the best, in this case supercars, that even the cars in the middle, being like, you know, high-end sports cars or even entry-level sports cars, they find themselves pulled forward, chasing after the competition. Competition with the world leads to innovation, but for Japan, their satisfaction to only succeed locally has led them to stagnation, because another comment I was constantly getting was people defending the fact that Japan is only aiming for their local or even just regional Asian markets. And while selling domestically and not innovating as much to please local customers who drive on small roads may seem like a good idea, over time, the surrounding countries around them will end up out innovating them, which will make it, you know, again, that affects national pride. Like, supercars to some extent represent your country. Like, even with the GTR, it peaked with the Nismo in the previous decade. Its fastest Nürburgring time is still tied with the previous generation 2015 Corvette Z06, not even the ZR1, much less a modern C8 or Porsche 911s or Lamborghini Huracans, and you get the point. This isn't me rubbing it into JDM fanboys. If anything, I'm sad to say that. Not only was it sad to see the GTR discontinued, it was even sadder that we never even got to see a R36. I understand that Japan was never super intent on appealing to foreigners, but the reality is we live in a world that's more connected than ever. Everyone across all borders can just look at a screen in their pocket and see what's happening everywhere, anywhere, anytime, and this can determine their judgments and how they look upon certain cultures and national pride and stuff like that. So now I want to kind of connect back to the local or regional markets within East Asia. The tables are still turning on Japan because they're diving further and further into bankruptcy, and it's getting to a point where Korea has quickly caught up to them, and China in many ways has already blown past them. China produces a vast array of supercars already, quite a few of which are even electric. Most of these are also fully made within their borders, so fully made in China. And that's not super surprising because when it comes to manufacturing and industry, China basically makes everything that the rest of the world uses. I know people like to make fun of China for being a copycat nation, which is totally true and valid criticism from the 2000s to mid-2010s, but moving into this decade, it's hard to not at least acknowledge them as potential competition. They're actually getting their stuff together and actually starting to do pretty groundbreaking things. Again, I wouldn't say they make the best supercars, I wouldn't even say they come close to making the best hypercars, but the fact that they're trying is in a sense something to be proud of. Having said that, you would think that this turning of tables would cause Japan to have a greater desire to keep up and even pass by these two countries, but instead they're just quietly withdrawing. And if things keep going this way, there very much exists a future where people like KDM or China DM more than JDM. Supercars help companies appeal to the youth. Like most entries this video, this one is a direct and indirect way of working. The direct way of working usually involves video games, movies, and so on that eventually leads to a sale in their adult life. One thing that people severely underestimate is that even if children are just playing video games and they don't actually end up buying the supercar from that video game, they will likely still buy a car in general from that same company that they grew up admiring as a kid. So who knows, if their income does get high enough, they may still eventually buy the actual supercar from that company. The indirect way is just boosting a company's cool factor and thus keeping them relevant and fashionable with the current youth. Like, imagine if Ford didn't make the GT and never raced it and never had that iconic moment with Ferrari at Le Mans. You would lose the history and heritage appeal that a lot of rich buyers like, but you would also lose out on the brand appeal with the movie, the video games, and ultimately what makes your company's name carry more weight, especially with, you know, modern youth. Even people like Moist Critical, when asked about his dream car, on a dime will just drop Dodge Viper GTS. It definitely shows how iconic a car is if people who've last saw it playing a game from a PlayStation 2 20 years ago can still on a dime say the car's name. That's just how iconic not only the Viper is, but again, basically every supercar. So anyone who says supercar marketing doesn't work is either lying or just straight up stupid. There's a reason that companies spend millions, even billions, doing research and development on making these cars. And the reality is they don't actually make the money back selling these cars because they only make 10,000, 1,000, or even just a few hundred of these cars. Selling the car itself isn't what's going to make them back the money. It's the influence that these cars carry that those companies are banking on. It's the dream that they instill on the youth. That's what keeps companies' name relevant to people for decades to come. And again, it leads to several potential future sales. Basically, the goal isn't actually to sell the supercar to everyone because, again, harkening back to the comment at the beginning of this video, not everyone's gonna drive way faster than the speed limit or go to track days. The point is, though, it's to sell them a dream because, admittedly, the whole point of a supercar is to increase a company's cool factor, which increases the likelihood that people will want to buy from the company. That's exactly how every single luxury good from every single market and economy works. So now let's look at the opposite end of this and why not having a supercar can negatively affect a company's brand image or staying power. Whenever I ask my non-car friends about companies like Toyota, Honda, or Buick, or really any company that doesn't actively make a supercar currently, the answer is usually just, yeah, they make cars, I guess. And when I ask them to name a car from those companies, they're just like, a Camry? And then when I ask them what they think of those cars, they usually just say, grocery getter, or commuter. And the thing is, it's not like Ford doesn't also make grocery getters. Hell, even Ferrari and Porsche make grocery getters these days. But again, it's the fact that those companies also make supercars, which then have technology that drips down even to their normal sports cars or performance cars or muscle cars in the case of Ford's Mustang, where it equalizes the company's cool factor. People still admire Ferrari and Porsche especially, despite the fact that they both make SUVs, wagons, and sedans. They overlook it because they make absolute works of art in the form of supercars. Like, I can't for the life of me get a non-car person or even a car person to think a company that doesn't make any active supercars currently, like Buick, I can't convince them to think it's a cool company. I can't even convince myself to think Buick is a cool company. I'm sure they make decent cars, and if you own a Buick, please don't take any offense. I'm sure it will run a long time and it's a good car. But no matter how many of them I see, all I picture is 60-year-olds sitting on squishy sofas. Truth be told, that used to be my perception of Cadillac too, but Cadillac escaped that brand image because they made performance cars, and even a supercar prototype, the Cadillac CN. Growing up as a kid and using this car in video games was the coolest thing ever. It makes such a powerful memory that sticks to the front lobes even until my adult brain fully developed. Like CDSV, also super cool. And now when I look at the modern new CDSV Blackwing, I can see bits and pieces of the CN's design language. The fact that that car's beauty and, inspiration still exist even a decade plus since it was canceled shows its long-lasting effect on a company and how it drastically can boost that company's cool factor. And the thing is, just like Buick, Cadillac still makes a bunch of squishy sofas meant for 60-year-olds. A lot of the rest of their lineup is still very Buick-like, but the reason they have way more cool factor than Buick is solely because of the CTSV and the Cadillac CN with its beautiful 7.5 liter V12. Yes, I know, Buick has made the GNX in the 80s and they had a supercar concept in the 80s too, but you gotta understand that from a Gen Z perspective or even a millennial perspective. Most young millennials and older Gen Z, in my case, we weren't born in the 80s, much less some of us even in the 90s, right? So admittedly, it doesn't change our perception of Buick because it happened too long ago. A good thing I like to do when I criticize a company like Harley Davidson is it's too hard to sell nostalgia to a generation that never has that nostalgia to begin with. They can't recall memories and history from a time before their time. Sure, I can read books and look at things in TV and old magazines about what the 80s was like, but that's not the same as living through it. And I'm sure the GNX was a great car. I'm sure Buick in the 80s was a much cooler company during that time because of those two vehicles, but admittedly, we're in the 2025s now. It's been a whole 40 years since then, and it's very obvious that if you had to sit me down and make me choose between Cadillac or Buick, I'm gonna say Cadillac because they're just the more cool factor car when it comes to appealing to younger generations because they have done more cool things. If I had to estimate how often a company should make a supercar, it should be every 10 to 15 years in order to maintain relevance with the upcoming younger generation. It's why the 2005 Ford GT and the 2016 Ford GT are perfectly spaced icons for millennials and Gen Z. Circling back to Japanese cars, because I'm sorry we got a little off topic, but I promise this is still a video about Japanese cars in specific. Toyota and Honda though, sure, as a car guy, you're gonna know about the Toyota Supra or Honda Civic Type R, but let's be real. Most of the general public are just going to see Toyota or Civic whenever they see those cars in public. In fact, I know a lot of non-car people and even some car guys, whenever they see the Type R, they just mistake it as a 16-year-old's car that has a big unnecessary wing on it, not realizing it's the factory spoiler that's actually beautifully sculpted and super aerodynamic, and I already made a short explaining how front-wheel drive cars still need them. Again, I'm a thoroughbred car guy. I've been a car enthusiast basically my whole life. I know that the Type R Civic exists, and I also know it's a very good car, but I can't blame the fact that most people will understand the appeal of it because the brand recognition just isn't there for Honda anymore. I really hope Japan makes a supercar sometime in the next 10 to 15 years, otherwise they're going to get the Buick effect that I mentioned, where who knows, maybe Buick may have a supercar 15 years from now, so then geez, that'll be really embarrassing for Japan. So the point is, your companies and your whole country image can be negatively affected if you choose to stop innovating and make just driving couches, just commuter cars, because there will come a point, and rather that point may already be happening, where even Japan's grocery getters can't even compete with other grocery getters because of their lack of a supercar. Is basically reducing their lack of drive, their lack of innovation, which then shows even for their mid-range to even their grocery getter cars, because at the rate Korea's going, Hyundai and Kia already makes very effective grocery getters, commuter cars, and yes, even sports cars and performance cars now. In the next decade or so, it's highly likely either Hyundai or Kia, or maybe even both, will make a supercar. I don't take pleasure in seeing JDM fail. While I don't wish for KDM to fail either, because the reality is I'm rooting for them and I want to see competition rise in East Asia, and as someone of Asian descent, it also makes me proud really step up to the worldwide plate and actually even compete someday with even Ferrari or McLaren or Lamborghini or Audi. That inspires me. That's cool. And again, like I said, it literally inspires the youth. And there absolutely was a time where a lot of us were able to talk like that, when Japan actually had the automotive world by the balls in the 90s to 2000s, a time when Honda took Ferrari by storm, and that time can exist again And so this video doesn't end on a total sour note. I'm going to mention Japan's next prospective supercar, the Lexus LFR. I'm aware that exists and I'm aware that they're producing it, but my fear is that it might die like a lot of Japanese concept supercars have recently in the past decade or so. Companies from Japan will try to make a supercar concept, but it just doesn't really actually make it through full development. And it's, again, with economic crises and even with Nissan's bankruptcy, you know, the chances of this making it to the end of production is slim, but not impossible. And I am rooting for them because Japan needs this. They need another titan, an absolute legend like Godzilla or the original NSX or the former LFA that this LFR will be succeeding. Another reason why I'm not super excited for the LFR is my fear is that if it does make it to production, it might only last 1 or 2 years, which is still a W, right? Like I said, it will still make Japan cool for the next decade or so. But what I really want is for them to make a actual supercar with staying power, something like the legendary Godzilla that persisted for decades to decades to decades. And again, even though it wasn't considered a supercar in its earlier run, it wasn't born a supercar, but it died a supercar. I remember people say that a lot about the Corvette around 2019 when the ZR1 came out, where they're like, the Corvette by birthright isn't a supercar, but it earned supercar status, which is why the C8 is considered a supercar, usually by everyone, even by, again, not considered an exotic car because its production is too high, but people do acknowledge the modern Corvette as a supercar, but they also are fully aware that the earlier generations don't inherit that title retroactively. And in that same vein, sure, the R33 and R34 don't magically ascend to supercars, but the R35, what a king, bro. Like, honestly, to some extent, the fact that it died a legend is still pretty admirable. Japan has a very unique style of supercars. They were affordable, where you could actually dream of owning one someday. They were just exclusive enough to still be cool, but still obtainable enough to be humble. They had great performance, great reliability, and surprisingly, an absolute symphony when it comes to sound. That's what I think of when I think of peak Japanese automotive performance, something I want to continue to hold in such high regard for as long as I live. So someday soon, I hope Japan makes another supercar. Thanks for watching. If you love automotive content, then make sure to subscribe. Check out my shorts, like and share this video to any JDM fanboy to make them become a sad boy. See y'all next time. Blade Angel out.